Good morning, everyone. I think it's, let's start. I hope everyone had a good time last night, and we all had, I think. And by the way, I'm Nancy Levine. You have seen the book. I'm chairing the panel. No, I can't be Nancy Levine. I am Mangai Natarajan. I'm a professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. And I'm very, very pleased to be here this morning to introduce our young people who are doing work on crime and opportunity. And also, there is a good contingency of Rutgers here, and also it's generational. And one of the authors of one of the papers is, co-author is Professor Clark. That is the generational height. And then next to me, and then Jonathan. He's a student of Professor Clark also. And Yasmin. She's also from Rutgers, and she's affiliated with Professor Clark with some work. And Jeremy, and he's working in the Urban Institute with Nancy Levine, who is a student of Professor Clark, and is all Rutgers mafia. And welcome to this panel. And this is about the public transport crime or transit environment. And we deal with quite a lot of issues, both in developing countries and developed countries. And I'm just going to ask Yasmin to really come and talk first, because though I'm listed on first, and Professor Clark always says, if you're a chair, you should not go first. You should really let others go, and then you should go last. So maybe I should really follow that. Otherwise, it's, I don't know what battle is going to be later on, so I'll just go last. So first is Yasmin. Let me give her the podium. Yasmin is from Urban Institute, Washington, D.C., and she's going to talk about the Washington Metro.
And I just dislocated my microphone. Oh, wonderful. Good morning, all. As Menga introduced me, my name is Yasemin Irvin Erickson, and I'm a research associate at Urban Institute's Justice Policy Center. And today I'll be presenting you our presentation with Nancy Levine, titled A Spatio-Temporal Analysis of Crime at Washington, D.C. Metro Rail. But before starting the presentation, I know this is our last day, but I would like to again congratulate Dr. Clark and Patricia Mayhew for their wonderful accomplishment. And especially I can talk for myself and on Nancy's behalf as well, being Dr. Clark's students, both of us. It's an honor and pleasure to be on the stage today. This is one of the many studies on crime patterns and trends in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area that is supported by a National Institute of Justice grant award. And as all we know, transit stations are particularly criminogenic settings. As suggested by the literature, particularly transit stations can attract crime because of, first of all, the attributes of the stations itself, and second, the characteristics of the environments in which the stations are located. And last but not least, the characteristics of the transit system overall. And according to these characteristics, a station can turn into a crime generator by breeding crime because it attracts a large number of people to the stations, or it can become a crime attractor because of the well-known criminal opportunities each transit stop provides. And the literature simply shows that the transit stations can become crime generators, crime attractors, or both. So based on that, we asked this research question, and we ask to what degree do crimes at metro stations vary according to crime generating and crime attracting nodal and place-based characteristics of the stations. When we were operationalizing our crime-generating and crime-attracting characteristics of the stations, we adapted several indicators from Bertolini. And if you're not familiar with his node and place model, he basically says that transit hubs are particularly one of the few places that attract people from very heterogeneous backgrounds physically together. Accordingly, the importance of transit stations not only comes from the fact that they provide this service for transportation, but also they employ a very important function and meaning within the broader city context. Another thing I should let you know about, this node and place model was first introduced to the crime and place literature by your very own Ceccato in her study with her colleagues in 2013, and also followed by another study by Andrew Newton and his colleagues in 2014 of the study of the subway stations in London. So all of these studies already show that the importance of these stations not only comes from their function as a station, but also their importance within the city context. And we build upon these studies by not only getting together several indicators of crime-generating and crime-attracting features of these stations, but also trying to create a typology for what we mean by crime attracting and crime generating, in addition to the number of people who attend or who use these stations. Our conceptual framework borrows from the environmental backlot argument and also the time geography framework. I know you're very familiar with the environmental backlot argument, but it basically says that the criminal decisions are made in an environmental backlot that is made up of crime generators and crime attractors. And time geography looks at the interrelationships of human activity and how they impose constraints on human behavior. So based on that, we assume that these crime-generating and crime-attracting characteristics of the stations are going to change not only for different crimes, but also at different times. Our study setting is Washington, D.C. Metro Rail. For your information, it serves Washington, D.C., Virginia, and Maryland with 91 stations. But in our analysis, we only included 86 of these stations because our crime data was from 2008, and we had only 86 stations at that time. And on average, Metro Rail serves close to 700,000 passengers, being the second busiest Metro Rail system in the United States. Our dependent variables is the count of robberies 2008, robberies and larcenies at the Metro Rail stations, and to account for the temporal crime-generating and crime-attracting nature of these stations, we divided our dependent variables into 3 different times, very similar to Ceccato and colleagues' study, the peak hours, non-peak day hours, and non-peak night hours. And the thing is, as I told you before, we adapted several indicators from Bertolini, and we tried to create a typology for what we mean for crime-generating and crime-attracting features. But we also classified these features or characteristics as nodal and place-space characteristics. So what we mean by nodal is the characteristics of the station as a transportation node, whereas what we mean as place-space characteristics is the characteristics of the station within the immediate environment of the station or within the broader city context. So our first variable is the connectedness of the station, which refers to the connectedness of each rail station to the rest of the transit system. And since we are talking about each station, this is a node-based characteristic, and we assume that the more a station is connected, the more people it's going to be attracting. Accordingly, it's a node-based crime-generating characteristic. And to produce this variable, we did a binary factor analysis of 2 variables. The first one was the station and interchange station, and the second one is if the station was a connection station to other rail lines. Our second variable is the remoteness of the station, which refers to the remoteness of each station to the metro center. And it's a place-based crime-attracting nature because, first of all, it talks about the position of the station to the rest of the city. And secondly, the literature already shows that particularly end-of-the-line stations experience a large number of certain crime incidents. And for this one, again, we did an exploratory factor variable by asking if the station was an end station, yes or no, and if the station has daily parking, yes or no. Our third variable was the accessibility and activity level at the station, which is a place-based crime-generating characteristic. And the reason for that, when we measure this, we are thinking about how much activity is around the station. So it's not particularly about that station, but the immediate environment of the station. And we assume that the more accessible the station is and the more activity you have at the station, then the more people are going to be, again, attracted to the station. So accordingly, this is a place-based crime-generating characteristic. And for this one, again, we did a principal component analysis of the number of establishments around the station, walkability around the station, and the ridership at different times at the station. Our fourth variable is the socioeconomic status around the station, and this is a place-based crime attracting characteristic. And the reason why we had this, we used this as a proxy for the level of social disorganization at the station at the block group level in US. So this is a place-based crime attracting characteristic because literature already shows that when you have more social disorganization, you're going to be having more crimes. And again, we are talking about the immediate vicinity, the socioeconomic status at the immediate vicinity of the stations. And for this, we did a principal component analysis of the percentage of employed people at the block groups of the stations, the percentage of home ownership, the percentage of white population, the percentage of people with bachelor's degree and above, and the median household income. And our last variable is the other crimes at the station. This is a nodal crime attracting characteristic, and the assumption for that, we assume that if you have a certain crime that is related to your outcome event of interest, which is robberies or larcenies, it might be an indicator for other crimes as well. So this is a nodal crime attracting characteristic, and for robberies we looked at larcenies and aggravated assaults, and for larcenies we looked at robberies as other crimes. And if you want to, at the end of the presentation, I'll be happy to talk more about this. Regarding our results and discussion, first I would like to give you some descriptives. The larcenies were observed to be dominant during the peak hours of commute, whereas robberies were much more homogeneously distributed between peak hours and non-peak night hours. I mean, this makes intuitive sense because larcenies are essentially crimes against property, whereas robberies are crimes that are against property and persons at the same time. So while larcenies can thrive on having more targets, robberies can be thriving on having more targets or less guardianship. So here I'm going to show you a very simple density map of the robberies at different times of the day around the stations. And the blue highlighted areas here on the map shows you the high density robbery stations. And the first thing you can see here, as I told you, our study extent includes Washington, D.C., Virginia, and Maryland. So in this map, or in this density analysis, we realized that most of the robberies during all of the hours, peak hours, non-peak day hours, and non-peak night hours, were clustered around the stations in DC. And another observation we had is that during non-peak night hours and peak hours, the robberies were much more homogeneously distributed around the DC metro stations. And here you can see the difference as I switch right away. So these are the high densities of larcenies in the Washington, D.C. metro rail. The first thing you can observe, regardless of the time frame, is that these larcenies are much more homogeneously distributed in Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. But another thing you can observe as we move from peak hours to non-peak day hours and non-peak night hours, larcenies were observed to get towards the end of the line stations, which we didn't see for robberies. So here in this table, I show you the results of the negative binomial regression analysis we did for robberies and using the incident rate ratios. And I'm going to very briefly talk about this. Again, if you have questions at the end, I'll be very happy to answer them. But with regards to peak hour robberies, we observed that the incident rate ratio for robberies increased with the increased number of aggravated assaults, the increased accessibility and activity level at the stations, and the decreased socioeconomic status at the stations. When we observed the patterns and trends for robbery during non-peak AM hours, we observed that the incident rate ratio for robberies was increased only with the increased level of connectedness of the station, which is a node-based crime generator characteristic. And then with regards to non-peak PMRs, again, the incident rate ratio for robberies were observed to increase with the accessibility and activity level at the stations and the decreased socioeconomic status around the stations. So this is the results for the robberies. Now we're going to switch to larcenies and we're going to see a completely different picture. And one of the biggest differences between robbery and larceny trends, if you can recall, robberies were observed to increase with decreased socioeconomic status, whereas larcenies were observed to thrive with increased socioeconomic status. So in our study extent, I'm just talking about Washington, D.C., larcenies were observed to thrive on an increased level of socioeconomic status, and also, in fact, although they're not significant, a smaller number of crimes at the stations. And again, larcenies were observed to be connected with other types of factors, such as the connectedness and remoteness of the station here during the peak hours. And for the non-peak PMRs, they were also related to the activity and accessibility level of the stations. So I know this is too much information in a couple of minutes, but what does that mean? These stations, with regard to robberies and larcenies, first of all, they were observed to exhibit different crime-generating and crime-attracting characteristics for two different crimes. And also for each crime incident, they were observed to have the stations to have different nodal and place-based crime-generating and crime-attracting characteristics. So what does this mean, especially for crime prevention? So when we think about it, when we know about why each station attracts certain types of crimes, we can tailor our tactical, strategical, or mechanical crime prevention activities. So if we know that a station is attracting crimes because there is a high number of passengers during a certain time of the day, or in contrary, if we have a very low number of passengers, then we can change the management of the station itself, the patrolling activities within the station, or even we can change, the order of trains, the timing of the trains, the intervals between the operating minutes of the trains. But if it's something that is much more broader, of a problem of crime around the stations, such as this level of social disorganization at the stations or the crime at and around stations, then we need a much more broader, response to the crime problem at the stations, which will include the inclusion of the residents of the particular neighborhood of the station, increasing the patrolling activities at the station, or anything that we can describe as problem-oriented policing that brings different stakeholders from any place you can think about to have a broader response to this crime problem. And with regards to implications for future research, one thing you can observe, we never talked about the design features of Washington, D.C. Metro Rail. And Nancy is not here today, but she would have talked more about it. But she had a study in 1996 and 1997 consecutively on Washington, D.C. Metro Rail, which showed that the design features, because they were so uniform, and the management features at Washington, D.C. Metro Rail, it didn't have any impact on the crime problem at and around the stations. So a future implication for that, a person can, or me, or any person can replicate this study by looking at the design and management features of the stations in Washington, D.C. and in other study extent. And we use very crude temporal groupings for the robberies and larcenies. We can, change the R's, we can make them even maybe more broader, which makes much more meaningful for policing efforts. So I would love to see such research in the future. So thank you so much. If you have any questions, I will be very happy to answer them at the end of the session. Thank you.
Yes, we have decided to have the question and answer session later, so.
Thank you.
Jeremy?
All right. Good morning, everyone. Echoing what Yasmin said, it is an absolute pleasure to be here. So my paper is part of the same project. Again, it's an NIJ, National Institute of Justice grant, looking at crimes in DC. And our team in particular has been working on crimes related to transit. So with Yasmin and our Center Director, Nancy Lavine, my paper is on bike thefts on the DC metro system, and we're using a routine activities approach. So first question, why study bike thefts? Admittedly, it is not often considered to be a high social harm crime, but it does affect a large number of people. And with a pretty high monetary cost. And it's also a very underreported crime, so the official numbers don't quite get at the extent of the problem. I think it's really been a theme of the weekend that if you're going to prevent crime, you can't just think of crime as a whole, if I can quote Professor Clark, you really have to get at the particular opportunity map of that crime. And following from that, there really isn't that much research on bike thefts, let alone bike thefts in the context of a transit system. However, researchers have suggested that transit might be particularly criminogenic for bike theft if we expect that people during the business day bike to the rail station, park their bikes, leave them unattended for a long period of time. So our study, DC Metro, actually conducts a bike census that we have 3 years of data for. And once we saw that, we decided we would be able to use that, since we have the measure of targets, we'd be able to use that to take a routine activities approach and kind of look at the interplay between the targets, guardians, and offenders. Just routine activities theory, just to define, even though I'm assuming most people in the audience probably know, just states that changes in the routine activities of potential victims and offenders will lead to different mixes of those factors, the guardians, targets, and that will lead, at different times and places, that will lead to different opportunities for crime. So our research question is, to what degree do these indicators of targets and guardians, which capture routine activities, explain station-level differences in bike thefts around the rail stations, and do other indicators, such as interventions or neighborhood characteristics, have more explanatory power? So as I said, we kind of started with the routine activities approach, and there's lots of studies that take a similar micro-level approach, either to crime types such as burglary, or there's some that look at bike theft. We did want to integrate the other important environmental theories, so include rational choice theory and crime pattern theory. So our approach was kind of to think about what we know on crime that happens on rail systems, and based on that, what do we expect to happen with bike thefts, and what can we test? So Professor Clark, along with Martha Smith, kind of provides a useful typology that I think incorporates a lot of the elements of those theories, where crimes are divided into peak hour crimes that are due to overcrowding and off-peak hour crimes due to lack of supervision. So where do we expect bike thefts to fall? Probably in the latter category. Again, we expect that people are leaving their bikes at stations in the middle of the day while they're at work. And a bike theft presumably is not something that can be done as spontaneously as a pickpocket of a passenger. So I think it's a crime that we think would really be aided by kind of lack of people being around. So that gets at the guardianship element. When I get to some of our other variables later, we can talk about how the various theories kind of guided our thoughts on how it should, why that variable is important. Those variables include interventions and various environmental characteristics. So I stole this slide from Yasmin's presentation, working on the DC Metro. Interestingly, DC Metro is currently going through a big strategy to try and encourage people to ride their bikes to the Metro. And so for that reason, bike theft is kind of an important topic to them, because if people perceive that their bikes are going to get stolen, they're not going to ride to the Metro. So in the data that we had, and this is partially what led us to conduct this study, is we were surprised at how bike thefts grew over the years we had data for, from 2008 to 2013. Obviously, robberies, including the snatches and pickpockets, is higher. This has kind of traditionally always been the case, but the growth in bike theft was noticeable to us and worthy of investigation. So the main data source that is allowing us to do this study is the bike census. It's been conducted 4 times, and Metro has staff go to each of their stations and count the number of bikes that they see parked outside of the stations, either at a rack or to a tree, to a post, wherever. All bikes that are there are present. So we thought, and it's 1 observation per station per year. It's done in the summer during peak hours. But we thought this was a unique opportunity. The other studies on bike theft that have kind of tried to estimate the number of bikes in an area have mostly relied on surveys. We're also using crime data from the Metro Transit Police Department, as well as the National Establishment Time Series, which Yasmin also mentioned, counts the number of businesses in different geographies of the city. So our methodology is a negative binomial regression. We're looking at different station level differences in bike thefts. And again, just to clarify, the thefts are occurring outside of the metro stations, not in the stations or on the trains. And the data, so we ran the regression for the 3 years we have data for, which is 2011, 12, and 13. The data I'm going to present is the 2013, just because it's the most recent, but I will make some references to the other years. So our independent variables, to look at guardianship, we have the number of riders using Metro Rail, and that's including entries and exits. The other guardianship variable is the number of establishments in the geography around the station. We also have variables specific to the bicycle environment. So total bikes parked is the big one because that's the targets, as I've mentioned. But also about 50 of the 86 stations have bike lockers. So you can subscribe, you can pay a yearly fee to park your bike in a locker if you use it often. Many of the stations also have a bike share, which I've seen around Stockholm. Bike shares are in a lot of cities, but if you don't know what it is, It's kind of a program where there's bike stations that you can rent out and drop them off at other stations so you don't have to have your own bike. We have a few neighborhood variables, such as if it's in the city, socioeconomic status. The walkability score is something that an organization online has developed. And then for our crime variables, one is fare evasion, and we included that based on the idea from research done in the New York subway that the people who are evading fares are going to be the ones committing lots of the crime. Another crime variable to note is that we included auto-related thefts. So this was theft of auto parts and theft from autos, and that was in the parking lots near the rail stations. And we expected that to be potentially associated with bike theft. So some of our results, looking at the time breakdowns, bike theft is definitely a weekday phenomenon. And even when you average it so that you account for the number of days, there's still much more bike thefts on weekdays and weekends. So that kind of supports the idea that this is happening during the business week. We unfortunately can't say with much specificity when they happen. We can only say when they're reported. That said, with most bike thefts being reported during rush hour, 5 p.m., 6 p.m., we can speculate that that's when people are coming back and seeing that their bikes are stolen and then reporting them. So it's not definitive, but that seemed pretty plausible to us. Descriptive statistics, just important to note, the mean amount of bike thefts at a station was around 4.5. Bikes parked, about 26. It's also worth noting that the bike theft variable is for the entire year, whereas the bikes parked, again, is for a day. And just to see kind of how they break down against each other, for the most part, as bikes parked goes up, so do the bike thefts. And there's some significant exceptions, particularly in the bottom corner. One of the biggest station in DC had the most bikes parked, but no thefts. And there's other exceptions, but the association's pretty strong. So running our regression model, the variables that were significant were the bikes parked in the positive direction, bike lockers, so if there were lockers, there were likely to be theft. Establishments in the negative direction, which supports the idea of guardianship. Inside the city in the negative direction, so thefts were more likely to occur in the suburbs. The walkability score in the positive direction, and the auto-related crimes in lots in the positive direction, and the fare evasion in the negative direction. Also noteworthy is that ridership was not significant, and neither was the bike share variable. So from what we can draw from this, the relationship between bikes parked and bike thefts is strong. It was strong and significant in all the years that we ran it. On one hand, this is intuitive. You obviously need bikes to be there for them to steal. I don't think it's as intuitive that the number would go, that as the bikes parked goes up, the thefts goes up, because it seems like there could be a threshold where just there's enough bikes that you can steal them. So the fact that there is that correlation, I think, opens up some questions about what exactly is happening. Some research has shown that most bikes that are stolen are done because they're locked poorly. So one explanation could be that the more bikes there are, the more likely an offender is to find one that is locked poorly. In terms of guardianship, we do have evidence that it's an important factor. The establishment's variable seems to be more important than the ridership. When we ran the model for the other years, both of those variables were actually significant in 2011. So they could be significant. And ridership, interestingly, is significant in versions of the model where we don't have the establishments and the city variable, and those variables are correlated relatively highly. So all of which is to say there's some evidence of a guardianship effect and that establishments is more important. One of the reasons for this could be that establishments get a better idea of the activity happening outside of stations as opposed to just that happening inside. With the bike lockers, it's important to note the bike lockers at all of the stations that have them, they were installed in the 1980s. So this is not a pre-post test. We can't comment on the effect of the bike lockers. And it seems, just based on the years of data we have, it seems like it's pretty likely that, as you would expect, the bike lockers are installed in areas where there traditionally are lots of bike thefts. That said, bike thefts at the stations with lockers are still high. Bike lockers are not eliminating the problem, and so it's something worth investigating. So leading from this, we then went to look at the stations with bike lockers, how many people are still parking outside at the racks or by other means, and it's a pretty good amount. Some of the other variables that were important, the bike share variable, we weren't completely sure what to hypothesize about that in the beginning. You could think that maybe if there's a bike share by a station, that could mean it's a gentrified area, because that's how it tends to be in the DC area, and therefore maybe bike share would mean lower thefts. You could also reason that if there's a bike share there, there's less of a reason for someone to steal a bike, so that could cause thefts to go down. It could also be a good station to ride your bike to, in which case thefts might go up. So we weren't really sure. Unfortunately, we weren't able to conclude anything, but it's an interesting thing to think about. The fare evasion variable, again, we put that in to get at motivated offenders. So we were expecting that the association would be fare evasion is positively correlated. It was actually negative and significant. This was a little puzzling. We think probably the best way to explain that is that fare evasion might be a better measure of security that can catch the fare evasion as opposed to the actual number of fare evaders. So just to wrap it up, we do have evidence that bike thefts are an off-peak hour crime happening from lack of supervision, with guardianship being important. The routine activities framework has been useful to look at this. Again, with the guardianship variable, and I talked a little bit about what I expect is the relationship between targets. You can say a little, you could think from the routine activities lens how that might lead to intervention. You could try to increase the visibility of where bike racks are, or perhaps divert security resources from the stations where there's going to be a lot of informal guardianship anyway. But if you're thinking in terms of interventions, it's probably more practical to think about some of the more traditional interventions that situational crime prevention would lead you to think of. And we do have we can comment on that a little bit. It seems that while we don't know what effect the bike lockers have had, we can say it doesn't get rid of the problem. There's likely a difference between someone who's going to pay a yearly subscription for a bike locker and someone who's not. So we can see that there's lots of bikes still at those stations, and if you want to reduce thefts there, a more effective way to do it might be to look at interventions such as registration programs or efforts to get people to lock their bike better. So it raises a lot of new questions, but we think the bike census gave us a good opportunity to kind of explore some issues about bike theft. So I will answer questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. And now I call Jonathan.
Thanks.
Okay, good morning. I'm going to talk a little bit about school commute safety and some of the research I've done on victimization during the school commute. I'm expanded upon this to incorporate situational prevention in my studies. And of course, the focus of school crime research has been limited primarily to within the walls of the school. And I think what drives a lot of this attention to school crime, it's the attention to the highly publicized incidents of school shootings within the United States as well as within Canada throughout the past couple of decades, which have certainly affected public perception of school security along with the safety of school children. So the resulting fear has contributed to the clamor for increasing school security measures and assigning police to schools, securing entrances to buildings, and so forth. So interestingly, whether or not any of these expenditures are justified based upon the threat to children's safety is, I think, somewhat debatable. The media often portrays certain offenses more serious than reality. So school shootings, for example, are problems which receive extensive media attention. They can reinforce the need for immediate action to address what could be, in a sense, a phantom epidemic. So similarly, heightened concern about school crime and violence in the 1970s within the United States led the U.S. Congress's commissioning a study on school crime. And the study found that schools are actually relatively safe places for children. So we looked at some of the previous data on this based upon analysis of the New York Times. 1998, the year before the violence at Columbine High School in Colorado, there were around 150 stories about school-related violence. A number of stories in newspapers jumped to 327 in 1999 following the shooting at Columbine. So the research found that the newspaper reporters often used rather emotional language rather than objective data. So the articles often discussed unpredictable nature of school children victimization, while at the same time blaming the schools for not doing enough to predict the incidents and to prevent them. So interestingly, there's been relatively little research on other forms of victimization. School children are usually the victims of either violence or acts that are referred to generally as bullying, which is a hot-button topic right now. The term school violence entered the school crime and victimization vocabulary in 1992. School violence can be defined in a number of ways, and there's no one definition found within the research as final. And we look at definitions of the term bullying. Bullying definitions vary within the literature, and they can vary significantly significantly between neighboring school districts. And despite the differences in definitions, school violence and victimization related to bullying normally fall along a continuum of offending, the scope of which can involve various forms of physical harm, psychological harm, and as well as property theft or property damage. So in contrast to some of the examples that I mentioned, the focus on violent crime and bullying-related offenses committed within the school, on campus, more recent research on school-related offenses against children actually identifies the commute to and from school as the riskiest activity. This is research coming from the US. Surprisingly, despite the data illustrating the peak in juvenile offending occurring after school dismissal, few studies have focused on the less lethal types of victimization that occur in relation to the modes of travel and the travel paths that juveniles take to and from school, with the only known studies to date being conducted in Europe. Dan Olveus argues that in both Sweden and Norway, the majority of bullying-related offenses occurred in school rather than during the daily commute. Despite the finding, the students in the study reported that they received considerably less help from others if they were bullied on their way to and from school, suggesting an absence of capable guardianship during the commute, which the present study has found. One reason for the lack of data and focus on the neighborhoods through which the children travel on a daily basis could be this ambiguous context of the school commute. Researchers may classify the victimization of school children during their commute to and from school within the context of school-related offenses. Some may claim these offenses are related to crime within the community, while other researchers may consider the school commute as part of the family context of victimization. It's the family's responsibility. Therefore, the uncertainty of the domain of responsibility during the commute to and from school could contribute to the significant gap in the research involving victimization of children during their daily journey. So this ambiguous nature is currently undergoing review in many state legislatures in the U.S., particularly in the area of cyberbullying, which has an even more ambiguous context, and the use of school-based police officers. So in addition to the media focus on the school as the site of victimization, is research that is focused almost exclusively on the school as the site. In Scandinavia, Olveus conducted large studies of bullying. And when addressing safety that go beyond minor forms of bullying, we find that this daily commute has increased risk. So some of the previous studies are showing that there's travel between the perceived safety of home and school as a risky activity. For European studies, there's some research done in Europe, some done in Italy, but generally it's very few studies on this particular issue. Research conducted by Andrea Lemieux from Rutgers, we heard speak on Monday, determined the relative risk of going to and from school in comparison with other everyday activities in which Americans participate. By quantifying the relative risk for various activities using data from the American Time Use Survey and the National Crime Victimization Survey, the findings using time-based rates of violence for 9 everyday activities indicates that the commute to and from school is the most dangerous activity in America, as well as the most dangerous in-transit activity. So his findings suggest this exposure to risk while commuting to and from school can be explained by the commute involving people of prime offending age, combined with lower levels of formal guardianship off school property. This section closely follows, in my research, follows this dichotomization of young people into victims of violence and victims of less serious offenses. So the victims of violence would include youth who are killed, robbed, sexually assaulted, or other types of violence which are relatively rare. And the less serious offenses, such as what we generally classify as bullying, tend to be the majority of offenses which school children encounter while in school, with the risk of violent victimization, again, that's being relatively minimal. So my research focused on a number of things. What's my primary research question? What's the relationship between mode of travel and victimization and perception of safety among school children during the daily commute? So I looked at what types of incidents do they experience specifically. What's the relationship between the mode of travel and the relationship between mode of travel and victimization? What do the students fear during their commute to and from school? And do the students feel safer in school or during their daily commute? So I studied a number of districts. I studied 4 districts. I did 2 urban. I did a rural district and one that was more of a suburban district within the United States. So the urban districts had a lot of violent crime, drug dealing. You could see some of the commuter paths. These are the paths in which the children would travel during their commute to and from school. Lots of alleyways and bars along the daily commute. Longer areas of longer commutes, lack of guardianship, and also alleyways is another district where they had a lengthy commute to and from school, where they would often encounter a lot of problems. Primarily vacant houses and areas within neighborhoods where there was a lot of drug dealing. So boarded up homes and unsafe travel paths. So looking at the mode of travel specifically, I was looking at walking alone, kids who walked with friends, walking with siblings, if their parents would drive or if they would take the school bus. It's somewhat unique within the United States and in Canada, where there's a mode of transportation, unlike in Europe, a mode of transportation dedicated specifically to school children. So outcome variables, I looked at the victimization, and I had to separate all of these things. Instead of just grouping it into one classification of bullying, I didn't leave the definition up to the children. I said, were you ever hit, kicked, pushed, shoved around, called mean names, rather than classifying it generally speaking as bullying? I looked at fear, and I looked at the witnessing of victimization. As well as the specific place. Did it occur on a bus, at the bus stop, on a playground, near the child's home, or near the school building, or other areas of concern? So locations where the students were victimized, and these are student surveys, students reporting near the school building, the majority of them, also near home, and a large number on the bus during their commute. And why would they avoid certain areas? Well, we had a lot of children wanted to avoid areas because of the lack of supervision, the lack of capable guardianship during their commute. And where did they feel safest? I found that the students felt safer at school, surprisingly, despite all the stories and the research which I discussed earlier. They felt safer at school than during the commute. So during the commute home, actually, they felt less safe than during the commute to school. So, summarizing some of the salient findings, I found nearly half of all students experienced at least one incident of victimization during the school year. Not necessarily, it didn't have to be a major violent crime incident, but at least one incident of victimization. So they mostly were the minor forms of victimization, teasing and name-calling, highest among students who rode the school bus. Half of all students feared walking alone, again, going back to routine activities and the capable guardianship. Over 30% of the students felt they needed some type of weapon to protect themselves. And very few students reported victimization to the school authorities. So when we think of policy implications, we often focus on what can the school administrators do or what can the teachers do. Well, very little, because I found that they really didn't know about it. Students in all districts felt safer at school, as I mentioned, than during their commute. So the theoretical framework for what one of the prior studies conducted in Europe referred to as the terra di mezzo, which is the land in between. From the theoretical perspective of routine activities, as I mentioned, we're finding that there was this absence of guardianship. There was undefined public space in between home and school. And this lack of ownership of violence-prone or unsafe locations. So the importance for crime we're finding were the co-offenders, the guardians, and the targets. So Eck further expanded upon routine activities in his development of the problem analysis triangle, including the outer triangle's elements depicting what could be to control or suppress a problem. Of course, the outer triangle depicts handlers, guardians, and managers who act as supervisors. The handler supervises the target, and the manager supervises the crime location. The absence of the supervisors makes an offense possible. Within the context of the commute to and from school, an offense occurs when the offender is not around his handlers, such as a parent or a school official, finds a victim who's not around the guardian, is in a setting that's not watched by a manager. Such areas could include a school bus stop, park, path, or a pathway to and from school. So the theoretical framework aligns with prior research on perspectives on safe or unsafe areas during the school commute. So in general, students had concerns about specific territories that they felt were particularly unsafe, which tended to have the characteristics of undefined space, which included the lack of guardianship. So this is also a period that when they're commuting to and from school, it's a period of freedom from the watchful eyes of parents, teachers, and administrators. So what are our implications for situational prevention within the context of the school commute safety? Safety can be enhanced by addressing situational factors. I won't go into all the techniques, but just to give some some examples. Unlike broader theoretical approaches that attempt to modify the youth's delinquent dispositions, which, as Professor Clark has noted, have not been successful, situational crime prevention blocks opportunities for crime by the manipulation of the environment. Referring back to my original argument that schools are indeed safer locations for children than their daily commute. Individuals and organizations take routine precautions on a daily basis as a preventive measure against crime. Individuals lock their doors, and likewise schools secure their entrances and employ police to patrol the corridors. So unlike the extensive routine precautions taken by individuals daily, children are seldom at liberty to alter their daily commute to and from school. It often requires passing through a lot of unsupervised areas. So we talked about the primary reasons given for why pupils avoid certain locations, being lack of supervision. It's one of the primary ones. This suggests that they fear that there would be no one to intervene if they were victimized or if they were about to be victimized. It was also the mode of walking alone that pupils claimed that they would prefer to avoid out of concern for their safety. The majority also felt safer at school than during the commute, suggesting a need for more collaborative efforts between the schools, families, police, and community resources. These institutions should encourage the development of strategies to monitor areas identified by the children as having hot spots, which can then be targeted for additional monitoring during the hours immediately before and after school. Flowing from the routine activities approach, the rhythms of the daily commute to and from school concentrate youth in different locations at different times of the day. So the routine of commuting creates the potential for victimization along these travel paths. So specifically, we can focus on resources in the community. Parent volunteers, neighborhood watch groups, school resource officers could be allocated in locations where youth congregate to wait for transportation. So to sum up, as Professor Clark observes, situational prevention will succeed only when the approach is focused on a specific offense. So we have to look at hangout opportunities where offending is likely to occur, and again, more precise definitions of offending, rather than the general bullying categorization which we find in policy and also in the literature. So future directions for situational prevention should address specific offenses tailored to the environment in which they occur. We should examine approaches that incorporate friendship groups, and as some of the findings suggest, the support of friends comprises perhaps the most important mechanism through which youth provide and maintain their safety. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, this is the last presentation. It's supposed to be the first presentation. So my presentation, or our presentation, because I'm the first author of this paper, I have a bunch of my co-authors are Carlos Carcach, Carlos Ponce, and Margarita, Mario, Mauricio. They're all from El Salvador. The paper is on situational prevention and public transport crime in El Salvador. It's a recent project that we did in El Salvador, and Professor Clark and myself, we were the international consultants, and they have local consultants and also researchers from the FUSADAs. And this project was funded by USAID. So I'll just give you an overview of this project, the purpose, the theoretical background, the crime opportunity theories, the methodology that we use, the rapid assessment methodology, an analysis of the mixed data, and situational crime prevention measures to deal with them, and the implementation of these measures and how we go about it. So the main purpose of this project is to gain a sufficient understanding of transport crime in El Salvador in order to identify possible preventive solutions. There are two phases to this research. One is to learn more about crime and disorder in El Salvador's bus system. The second is using international experience to identify culturally sensitive practical measures that might prevent or reduce crime and disorder. I don't know whether you could see the map. El Salvador is just very, very tiny country. It's a Central American country. And with a population of 6.3 million, it borders the Pacific Ocean with Guatemala to the west and Honduras to the north and east. The capital is San Salvador. It's a modern city that serves the financial center for Central America. Whenever you think about El Salvador, it reminds you of the gang warfare, which is the main reason that El Salvador experiences some of the highest murder rates in the world. It is the murder capital, that's what I was told. The public transport system, approximately about 200,000 people use San Salvador's buses daily, and there is no trains, subways, trams, but only buses. Bus is the main public transport system for them. They use taxis, but not often, but the buses are the public transport system. Two kinds of buses provide services on 3 different types of routes, serving the entire San Salvador and metropolitan area of San Salvador. So there are about 11,500 buses or minibus, microbuses are there, serving different routes. Urban, interurban, interdepartment, there are 3 different routes. Bus crime, what do we know about the bus crime in general? And we don't know much about it. Only these 2 studies that we looked at, they gave some sort of picture about what's happening. An Instituto de Medicina legal report that gave a sort of snapshot, 3.3% of all homicides in El Salvador during the 5-year span, 2018 to 2013, occurred within a public transit vehicle. This amounts to 715 homicides, a truly horrifying number for such a small country. So the project used the crime opportunity theories, and because Professor Clark and we both are environmental criminologists, and that's where we were brought to do this study. So the project idea is the framework is crime opportunity theories, routine activity theory, crime pattern theory, and then the rational choice perspective. You've been hearing all day, yesterday, today, and I don't know, in the future. So these theories underpin situational crime prevention, which broadly conceived include designing out crime, crime prevention through environmental design, the SEPTED, broken windows, policing, and problem-oriented policing. The key to the approach is careful analysis of specific forms of crime or disorder to identify the pinch points where preventive measures or efforts might be economically be focused, because we are talking about problem in a developing country. So that is something that we have to really remember. Understanding the transport crime in El Salvador involves understanding the structure and functioning of the bus system first, the passengers' experiences and perceptions of crime. They are the commuters, they are the users, and we have to know about the ground level operations of the bus management and the police strategies and activities to deal with the bus crime. So these are the major areas that we need to really understand what's going on to understand the bus crime itself. So we used rapid assessment methodology. This is very, very valuable for developing realistic time-bound interventions, and it helps prioritizing the most affected parts of the city, country, and identifying specific problems like high-risk places, high-risk populations, sectors that need attention, developing targeted interventions to bring the most benefit. And most often, this rapid assessment methodology is used in public health and medicine field to study as a disease that broke out in a place and in a particular place and particular country. So they do quite a lot of this rapid assessment methodology. And it's apparently, according to McIntyre, striking a balance between methodologically appropriate and logistically feasible measure, because it doesn't require, if you want to really do a study for policy intervention right away, there's no need for random assignment or control groups to really look at it, because we won't really deal with the problem there. So that sort of that is the rapid assessment methodology. And it is very much suitable for developing countries because there is no program of long-term research exists. So the data collection method, we use different data collection methods. One is focus group discussions, and other one is systematic observation of public transport system in El Salvador. And we use the whole journey approach to collect the data on this observation. Basically, that comes out of the international research on transit crime, the whole journey approach. That is that's very important to really look at, because you have listened to other presenters. The commute to, the land in between, walking to, from, to and fro, and waiting for the bus, or waiting for the train in the bus stop or train station, and while you are in the bus. So there are three concepts. It's called whole journey approach. We did an systematic observation of using the whole journey approach, and also we did systematic review of international literature on transport crime with special reference to the bus crimes and prevention, because in El Salvador we don't have trains or trams or subways. So the focus group interviews were undertaken with 4 different groups of participants: the passengers, bus drivers, fare collectors, public transport officials and police, and bus company owners and managers. A total of 156 individuals participated in 21 group discussions. Each discussion took 2 hours, as required by USAID Ethical Board. Informed consent was obtained from all the participants, and they were assured of anonymity. This is very, very important in doing such research, especially when it involves certain types of crime in El Salvador, especially in the bus public transport system. The topics we covered were transit patterns, the nature of the crime victimization, sphere of crime and its sources, disorder and the nature of incivilities, quality of public transport, and government transport authority policies. So these are very, very specific to the focus group discussions. And the environment, the systematic observation of transport system, I also observed and I took all the bus rides locally and then all the suburbs and everywhere. So it is a bit interesting, and I would say safe, not safe, because I had a bodyguard, tall, hefty man, so I didn't feel that much fearful there, but because of the bodyguard, I guess. So consistent with the whole journey approach, a total of 22 routes were observed, 18 bus and microbus routes were observed during 6 time slots, and this resulted in 120 observation occasions. So we did quite a thorough observation of this transport system. And in the review of literature, yes, we covered. When we looked at the literature, it's all about trains, subways, trams, jitneys, and buses. And there are about 500 studies were identified. 275 were academic literature, and 225 were gray literature. They are reports or unpublished reports. Nearly all of the studies were published within the past 40 years, which means that the literature on transport crime is relatively recent. Nearly all the studies were undertaken in developed countries. Most of the literature is concerned with describing and explaining the transport crime. Very few studies deal directly with the prevention of crime. And a large majority of the studies focused on trains and subways, with only 40 studies focused on bus crimes, another 20 study articles and reports that focused on public transport crime prevention, including some mention of crime in the buses. So we didn't include the crimes that were related to taxis or airline travel. So basically, our findings is looking at what sort of problems we had in El Salvador in relation to bus public transport system. So we divided them into disorder and crime. One is the concession scheme and competition. This is a very, very important element of the root cause for the disorder. What happens, the Vice Ministry of Transport that manages or oversees the transport system, that gives concession to the bus owners, and in order to really give subsidized fare for the public. You won't believe it's only 25 cents to ride a bus anywhere within the El Salvador. So it's very, very cheap, and it is to really make it cheaper for the public. And the government or the Vice Ministry of Transport gives concession to the bus owners, and then the bus owners subcontracts that to the bus drivers, and then the bus drivers every day they have to give, say, $50 or $60, and then they have to make on top of that, whatever they make on top of that, they can take it. So in order to really have that $50, first of all, to give it to the managers, the bus owners, and also to make money for themselves, there is a competition, because there are 11,000 buses, microbuses in the system. So there is a big-time competition. There's a chaos. And the buses they won't stop. If one is at stop, so the other bus won't stop. It will go further away and stop. And it is a chaotic thing, and people can get off anywhere, get up, get in anywhere. That sort of system. There is no rules or regulations because of this competition, and it's also a big-time disorder. And then the condition of bus units, operators' behavior, and chaotic conditions of the bus stops, overcrowding, distraction by microbuses, vendors. You won't believe in the buses you will have tomatoes, avocados selling in the bus, inside the buses, and sometimes it distracts people, and then there are lots of queues for robbery later on because of these distractions. Who is there, who is sitting in the bus, and they will notify to the robbers, and then the robbers can come back to the next stop and then steal from them. So these sort of things are very, very common there, and no regulations for bus stops. Regarding the crime, because it all came out of our focus group discussion. Sexual harassment of women being mostly identified, robberies and thefts, and collusion between the operators and criminals. Apparently, the bus operators work with the gang members, and then they have a sort of understanding, and that also directs some of the crimes. And then the one crime that is unique to El Salvador is extortion. Extortion of bus owners and then the bus operators. This is a very, very important issue. And according to the 2011 news agency report, 18 million were collected as protection payments from the transit companies. So this is a huge issue. Our focus group discussions also indicates that extortion is a serious crime problem for transport management, including the drivers and bus owners. And extortions can certainly help to explain the violence in the public transport system, which is so prevalent in El Salvador, and perhaps also in Guatemala and Mexico. Though extortion can take many forms, a program of research is needed to understand the impact of this extortion on transport crime. This is one of the serious crimes there. And if you look at the pictures, it's overcrowded all the time. This is a minibus, microbus, bus, and they are different colors. People don't know the routes, different colors, different shades, different designs, and it's completely a chaos. And people can get off anywhere in the intersections. There is no stop, and there is quite a lot of buses stop in the bus stops, in the bus terminals. So again, there is no rules and regulations. And inside the buses, quite a lot of graffiti, and especially obscene pictures. That's my picture, not my picture. This is my photograph. Not my photograph there. And the turnstile, this is, which is very, very unique. And I've never seen turnstile inside the microbus. This is very, very tiny, but you have a turnstile to get in. And there is no cash machine or anything. This is just a box. It is open. It is sort of inviting or attracting the robbers to take the box just like that. So these are the things that we observed. This is just to give you tomato. You can, if you run out of tomato at home, so you can buy in the bus, and your snacks in the bus. And the turnstile is very, very small. And if a huge person like me, if you get in, it's very hard to really get in with with a backpack or anything. So it's sort of, it crumbles and it makes other passengers annoying, and then they shout and because they have to leave, and all sorts of annoyance are there because of those sort of situations. So anyway, I just gave you a snapshot of what the crime problem is in El Salvador. So 2 sets of preventive measures that we suggested. One is the general measures relating to the operations of the bus system as a whole, which will help to create a more orderly and secure transport environment. And the second measure is more specific measures designed to reduce opportunities for very specific crimes occurring on buses or at bus stops, such as homicides, robberies, and sexual assaults on women. So, as you know, our Stockholm Prize winners, Ron Clark's, this is the first time I'm saying Ron Clark, Professor Clark's SAP, Situational Crime Prevention, that is his opportunity reduction measures, that comprises 25 techniques under 5 categories. So we used most of this agenda, these techniques to develop measures in combination with the international literature, what has suggested for prevention. So the effectiveness of SCP, I don't have to say, and there is always, people will say there is a displacement, but the offenders will not simply commit crime elsewhere. It may be the case. And there is also, if we introduce these sort of SCP measures, that there is a diffusion of benefit. So that nearby crime not targeted by the crime prevention measures. And also, this is not just for El Salvador. It can be the diffusion of benefits to go to Guatemala, Honduras, and Mexico, or nearby countries, because they all have similar sort of problems. So to achieve a substantial reduction in crime in El Salvador in the bus system, that will require sustained planned effort over many years, requiring a large investment of government funds or non-government funds. So we looked at different set of measures. One set of measures, transport system related measures, make the public transport system appear unified and formal, enhance laws and regulations regarding bus units, bus stops, routes and terminals, enhance law and regulations regarding operators, redesign the transport system, the routes, terminal, interchanges, and bus stops, number and type of units. It's a big-time chaos. So they have to have a sort of redesign the transport system, revise the route concession policies, procedures, and regulation by the Vice Ministry of Transport System, and ensure the administrative and financial robustness of concessionaries to guarantee proper operation. So they have to really enforce those sort of things. And the state law enforcement capabilities, because the law enforcement, we see police here and there, but it doesn't really do much about it, because you need a subdirectorate of national police, which is suggested in the literature that you have to have a separate transit police to deal with the transport problems. So create a transport police force within the Vice Ministry of Transport System and create a new class of public employees as inspectors of buses to undertake regular checks of the buses and drivers and monitor for administration violations and issue fines to companies and operators accordingly. So it's all regarding the transport system issues, and provide enhanced training for the bus operators, removes sources of conflicts and corruption and so on. And the next set of measures to improve the image of the buses and cosmetic changes. This is very much needed because the buses are different colors, different styles, different designs, and all sorts of graffitis all around and graphics on the buses. You can't really figure out which bus goes to which route and things like that. So the color coding based on routes and signage we recommended, provide uniforms to the bus staff, label priority seats for the disabled, elderly, and children, encourage operators to repair the internal upholstery of the buses, install pull card to signal the bus operators to stop, daily routes and bus numbers in the front and back of the buses and at the bus stops. So prohibit decals and other materials that portray sexual or vulgar content. So the other set of measures is enhance level of surveillance, appoint security guards at company, drivers and on dangerous late-night routes with frequent scheduled stops, designate female-only buses on very crowded bus routes, because you will say, why female-only buses? And there, female-only buses have been existing for a long time in many developing countries. I have traveled, when I was going to school and college, I have traveled ladies bus only. and it still exists in India. There is no evaluation whether it works or not, but it works, it's still there. So in many of the South American countries, they use female-only buses, female-only train coaches, and in Rio, they have a pink train coach at the back that designates this as a woman-only coach. And in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran, they all have pink buses and run by women only. So this exists. This female-only concept exists, but we recommended that for some routes on very crowded routes. So install CCTV cameras inside the buses to help drivers watch passengers and allow remote monitoring and recording. So there are plenty of, there is a long list of recommendations that we provided, so which is all based on the review of literature, international literature, and also from our observation, what is there and what is not there, what can be introduced. Quite a lot of surveillance measures, say, for example, improve natural surveillance at trimming bushes, trees near bus stops to increase visibility. And we also have recommended having bus stops in some places, because there's no bus stops in some places, so people have to stand on the corridors or a pavement. So they also have to really post signs of the punishments to alert conscience for likely offenders. These sort of measures comes directly from the literature. And we also suggested research and evaluation is very, very important, improving the monitoring and capacity research and evaluation of crime and safety in the transport system. So they need to really develop a research program or agenda to look at these transport crime problems on a regular basis and do an evaluation and publish the reports. To conclude, yes, because I just have to really finish it. This presentation, we have outlined the preventive measures to make the bus system more orderly and secure. The next step towards implementation will require the measures to be rigorously assessed for their practicality and feasibility. This is very, very important when we do research. We study this problem, we recommend solutions or measures, but we won't know sometimes whether these measures will be implemented and when it will be implemented, who will be implementing, and things like that. So in another 2 weeks from now, and our team is presenting this to our funder, the USAID, and other stakeholders. They are coming to listen to us, and then I've already been requested from small business groups, and give us the recommendations, which recommendations we could really implement. Tell us. There is an eager to implement these recommendations from non-governmental agencies. So now there is a good dialogue goes between the government, non-government agencies to work on this, especially the USAID is sort of facilitating this sort of research, and it is quite useful. And this assessment will require the participation of government agencies directly involved with overseeing and running the transport system, the police, staff, unions, and possibly representatives for the public. So we are doing the public presentation in 2 weeks from now. The second set of measures designed to reduce opportunities for very specific crimes can only be identified by careful analysis of how these crimes are committed, the perpetrators, victims involved, and the conditions in which the crimes occur. So this has been a sort of agenda for crime opportunity theorists or the situational crime prevention specialists. We have to be crime specific, and we have to understand thoroughly the problem. So in order to really be specific about each of these crimes, we need detailed information of this kind, and we have to really do small focus group discussions in future and do further research to study these problems, and probably we will guide the research and planning unit when it is recommended. The program of interventions described in this presentation will require a considerable effort involving large costs for El Salvador, but the rewards will be great. Not only, as I said, there is a great diffusion of benefits. Not only would crime on the public transport system be reduced to manageable proportions, but there are good scientific reasons for expecting these benefits might diffuse to the remainder of the country with untold resulting benefits for the people. Thank you. So, where are the panelists? If you have any questions for the panelists, you can ask. We have only 2 minutes, so the next presenters in the next panel is going to come. Just one minute to give. Any questions? We have the panelists. No questions? Jonathan is here.
When they came back, or it was the other way around. I think it was when they went to school, right? I'll come back.
Sorry, let me get this hooked up. Okay. Just quickly, the question was, why did the students feel more unsafe during their trip home from school than during their commute to school? And I'm thinking there were some scores that needed to be settled, that have things happen during the day. That was one of the reasons, and they had a score to settle after school. And that's why I think there was some fear during the commute home versus to. The other reasons, because we're seeing more youth congregate after school rather than during the commute to. During the commute to school, I was finding that a lot of parents were dropping the kids off, but yet they had more time after school to hang out and congregate and get into trouble and fight. So that fueled a lot of that perception that it was unsafe going home. So there was some interesting finds with that.
Is it because here in Sweden, 3 o'clock can be quite dark already in November, for instance, but that wouldn't be the case in your case study, right? I'm thinking about the time variation, seasonal variations, and how the urban landscape would be changing.
There are some problems in large districts in Michigan, in the United States. Detroit was having similar problems because of the darkness. The kids would be going to school in the morning when it was dark in the wintertime, and that was contributing to some very specific problems, particularly safety. And I mentioned with SCP installing better street lighting because of that, because of the seasonal differences in the northern states, in which they would commute in darkness in the wintertime.
Yes, thank you. I just have a comment to Mangai too, but I guess there are other questions, or? I just want to congratulate with this work you are doing in a city like El Salvador. I think your example shows the types of challenges that are very basic in cities of Global South as El Salvador. So we can't use the same templates. And this is something that we can develop in the future in relation to situational crime prevention. Well done.
Okay, thanks for coming back to listen to us or listen to me, and give the youngsters a big clap so that they be encouraged to come again.